everybody. Welcome to the SFIS Speaker Series. We're our first of the semester on the first week of semester, so this is really great. I'm going to let Lauren introduce our speaker, but I just wanted to let you know that we have these talks on various issues related to innovation and society regularly. They're usually Mondays at this time, 10:30 to 12, and we'd love it if you would consider joining us. If you're interested in being on our mailing list, or you want to know about future talks, or be reminded if you already know about them, come talk to me. So I'll turn it over to Lauren, who will introduce our speaker.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Fletcher Beaudoin. He's now with his own consulting firm, Brightest Consulting, but I got to know Fletcher in his capacity as director of the Institute for Sustainable Solutions at Portland State University, where he was for more than 10 years. And Fletcher and I worked together creating an international network of city-university partnerships that exchanged knowledge and built capacity to facilitate sustainability transformation in these cities across the world. And it has been my pleasure to work with him and get to know him. He's an exceptional leader. In his time at the Institute for Sustainable Solutions, he really made it an exemplar of university embedded, community-oriented research with a focus on long-term relationships between university researchers and the communities that they serve. And so for us here at ASU, where we think a lot about taking fundamental responsibility for the health and sustainability and thriving of the communities that we serve, I think there's a tremendous amount that we can learn from his experience at ISS. And he's now ventured off in his own consulting gig and is going around and working with different organizations on how they can form partnerships and lead for this the complex challenges that we face now. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Fletcher, welcome him up here, and looking forward to your talk.
Thanks, Lauren. It's also kind of fun to be in this room, because for a long time this is the School of Sustainability, and now it's different orientation, and I have many good memories of this room. So although I would like to see the light at some point, but I don't think that's possible in this room. This room is also interesting to me because it kind of forces people to come in here too, because you're kind of at the middle. Lots of good conversations here. I'm going to put this, I now have with my daughters, like I have this thing when I go away. I have two daughters, and I try and tell them like why I'm going away. And kind of be really clear with them that I'm not leaving them, right? And I'm going to do something in the world. And so I've got this little meerkat was the thing that was supposed to come with me. So the meerkat's going to kind of be with us here because my daughter said she wanted me to have the meerkat. That's like having her present.
Take a picture of you with the meerkat so that you have evidence of its presence.
Would you like it right now, or
hold it up? Okay, there you go. You can.
It was an interesting thing because I was like, so Junie, so this is my youngest daughter. I was like I'm going on this trip and I'd really love to bring something with me. And she came out into the main room and she had like 50 stuffed animals. And she was like, well, this one kind of gets a little lonely when it's travel. And she gave me the whole thing. And I was like, well, let's cut it down a little bit to ones that fit in my briefcase. But she had like a giant panda. I was like, I'm probably not gonna bring that. And we went through this very interesting process of where she was doing deductive reasoning about what's going to work and what's not. So we landed on meerkat. Sorry, thank you all for having me here today. Lauren, thanks for the great welcome. Most of the times I've come to ASU and I've been so appreciative of all the times I've been here because I've learned so much every time. And I've normally had a different hat. This is the first time I'm coming here after my kind of 15-year career at Portland State University. So it's a bit of a different hat. And I really appreciate the opportunity to give this talk because it's the first time I've actually gone back to the beginning of my career and kind of tried to trace the way I think and kind of some of the values I've developed and the practice I've built, trace it back to those origins and kind of land into this moment, which is me not being in a university, but working with universities right now. So the title here is, and the last thing is, and thank you SFIS for having me to give this talk too. I really appreciate the opportunity. So we're going to be talking about moving from transactional to transformative, designing teams and partnerships for an increasingly complex world. So I'm one of these people, I get to work with all these amazing faculty and students and staff, administrators who are working on these really hard problems. And I'm always kind of the weird one who's always asking the questions about the infrastructure and the teams that make everything go. like I love the ideas. Like I've worked on waste management, I worked on climate action plan, all those content areas, super critical, and I care about them. But I'm always the one that starts with the people. And I'll tell you a little bit about why I've done that, and why that's been a trajectory in my career. But I'll make the argument during this talk that I think we're actually underinvesting or investing in the wrong types of things when it comes to building great teams and great partnerships. I'll also talk about how I think like what is actually limiting us from building the types and teams of partnerships we need to go after this complex world that we're facing right now. And so I'll kind of go through this talk, and I'll frame out at the beginning, which is the beginning of my story of kind of like how I got interested in teams and partnerships. Then I'm going to give this kind of exemplative case, which was kind of a signatory part of my experience of shifting to really think about how do we intentionally build teams and partnerships, and why that's critical to the futures that I want. And then I'll dive into the project that Lauren mentioned, which is this global network that I was connected to that provided this framework for learning and building essentially a model for transformative teams and partnerships for a complex world. And as I kind of investigate some of the things we'll learn, I'll start to talk about some of the practices we put into place. So the very tangible things we're doing to try and disrupt the way that normal teams and partnerships are built currently. So a lot of this talk is really going to be focused on like the ways we currently develop teams and partnerships now tend, for the most cases, to reinforce the status quo. And a lot of the status quo that we have right now is not what we want. And so if we're going to actually make progress on things like real big, societal sustainability challenges, we actually have to disrupt the way we're working together on the build new structures around new ways of working. So I'm just going to talk about essentially how we go through that disruption in a way that allows us to kind of to build towards a better future. Lastly, I know I'm belaboring the first slide here, but I have to go back to my kids. So before I left, my oldest daughter, I talked with her. And because what I do is really weird. Like when I try and describe, like, it's not like, oh, I'm a teacher or whatever. It's like, it's a complex thing. And I was like, and I was trying to talk to my daughter who's going through a lot of stuff in her life right now at 8. And she wasn't talking to me, but eventually it broke out, and she told me something she did at school. And she said, hey, so our teacher did this really interesting thing where each one of us had to help the whole class figure out how to make a shape together. So we had to everyone make a heart or a square. And I was like, well, how'd that go? And she was like, it was really hard. It was really difficult. And she's like, but I figured out that like, this is what you do, Dad. You help people collaborate on hard problems. And she told her teacher that in this very clear way. And I was just like, she's articulated it better than I've ever been able to articulate it to her. And so I'm bringing it back to you all. My other daughter, which will be the prelude to one of my slides, I asked her later that night, and while we were doing the stuffy thing, I was like, Junie, what do you think I do? She goes upstairs and she gets my wireless keyboard, and she comes down and she goes like this. And I was like, what are you doing? She's like, pushing buttons. I'm like, that is also true. So I have two articulations of what I do. They're both true. I'm now going to talk about that. So at the kind of beginning of my career, this is the president of Portland State University and the incoming mayor. This is the beginning of my career. It was a really special time in Portland. We had a university, let knowledge serve the city is our motto, coming together with a very, very progressive city, first city to have a climate action plan, doing really innovative stuff around sustainability, waste management, climate, a whole bunch of things. They both on their first day rode bikes in together and said, I mean, how great is that? Our city and our university coming together, first day, we're going to do this, right? Right around that time, we also got a $25 million gift from the James F. Marion L. Miller Foundation to use sustainability, very similar to the Wrigley gift, use sustainability to kind of build this pan-campus community responsive sustainability initiative. And with that, we built the Institute for Sustainable Solutions. At the time, I was playing, I think I was partnership coordinator. I would eventually direct the Institute. But the Institute was designed, very similar to GEOS, to connect across disciplines, connect into partners, use-inspired research, let's help make the city really accelerate its journey. So all these conditions were happening. And we just started doing a bunch of stuff. Like I would call it the kind of the shotgun approach. And so we just, I mean, I can't even tell you, we had all this interest, and we just said, okay, let's go. We didn't really have a strategy at the time. That's another talk probably, but we just started doing a bunch of things, and that cycle kept going on for maybe 3 or 4 years, where I was like this person on the front lines trying to get, compost in residence halls, trying to like figure out different types of bike infrastructure, all this type of stuff. And I remember being in this one meeting where I thought we had done all the right stuff, and we were at this point where we were talking to the partner who was going to do something, right? We were going to have some sort of outcome, and the meeting fell absolutely dead. And it was like we'd done all the right stuff, right? And like the partner wanted more information or whatever. I eventually learned that they didn't think the ideas were good. There's a whole bunch of other things that were going on, but that moment I was like, something is broken in the way I'm doing my job, because I'm trying to make progress on these really hard issues, and I keep not really getting there. And I'm spinning my wheels, right? And this is at a guttural level. This is before I kind of like knew a lot of the literature on sustainability science, transformation science, all this, complex problems. I was just like, doesn't feel right. So I remember taking I think I took a week, and I just reflected. I looked at all the projects, like what has happened during this period of time, and like what have I learned, like what's gone right, what's gone wrong, and I kind of found some things that were broken. And a lot of the broken things, though, they really came back to how people were working together or not. People or teams working together or not. These different factors related to people and how we were managing people in these projects and collaborators. That's what a lot of these things came back to. And so this is kind of what I found. And I mean, these things are simple. I mean, I'm sure maybe many of you know of these. I'm sure you've all experienced them maybe at different times. But we have these essentially these factors that I would conceptualize as these are the things that were creating incremental progress. That feeling in my stomach was incremental progress. I wanted something more significant. So we would see time and time again, someone was interested in an idea, but it never got to the point where they really wanted to do something about it. There'd be excuses around time requirements. So someone's like, that's a great thing, but like, I'm really busy right now. Like that maybe next year or something. That usually would tell me that they didn't really like the idea. Bland or dysfunctional team dynamics. I can't tell you the amount of meetings I've been into where you're just sitting in there. No one's really talking. Maybe one person's talking. Maybe there's even some toxicity, and it's just not good, right? And it's a sticky, icky feeling. And I've had lots of those meetings. And then narrow vision. That was the other thing. Is like I kept going to these projects where it's like here's a change we could see, and we'd go for that low hanging fruit. Like again and again and again, and it was never quite big enough. And this just created this cycle of incrementalism in my practice. So I was like, well, what if we changed that, right? What if we and so this is what came out of my reflection is those are the things that are messing it up, right? And I don't want to do those things anymore. So what's the opposite of those things? So I'm going back to logic with my children. So what if we built a vision that actually compels and includes something that grabbed our heart and probably was a little bit bigger, intentionally grabbed a few more people than is absolutely necessary for the smallest change. What if we started with motivation? What if we really, instead of just trying to get someone in the room, what if we tried to get them in the room and get their heart in the room, get them fully there behind the thing? What if we tried to do that? What if we, instead of starting with this deficiency mindset, which we quite often do, and saying what is the least amount of money I can do this for? And instead saying, what are the resources I can bring to, what's the maximum amount of resources I can bring to this? And then what if we actually built good teams? What if that was actually part of the work? So instead of coming in and just being let's see what happens, instead we put a level of intention on team that, at least in my career, I'd never done. So that was my premise. I was like, okay, those are the things that I want to be part of my future. And from there, right after this happened, someone came to me with a project. So they said, so this is the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management. This is the city of Portland. These red lines here are what's called ETRs. So these are emergency transportation routes. And they came with this project, trying to look at prioritizing ETRs under 9.0 magnitude earthquake. So have people here heard of the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake in the Pacific Northwest? So It's likely to happen. It will be, it's different than normal earthquakes that kind of happen more episodically. It'll be this massive event that will have extraordinary impacts on our infrastructure. So the project here is like, okay, if that's going to happen, what are the roads we clear first and why? Like, that's the question. This was the basic map. They wanted to update it. There's a whole bunch of problems with it. And so originally my old mind would have been, okay, that's cool. I know a researcher who does transportation. I've got this intern. Okay, let's go. We'll follow your vision. But I had just done this. So I did this differently. And what I did is I took those principles that, like, what if we had vision? What if we got people motivated? What if we built abundance capacity? And what if we actually invested in our team? And I thought about those 4 factors in the context of this project I was facing. And it changed everything. So first of all, from the beginning, PBM reached out to me, but at that first conversation, I said, hey, I also want the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to be there. Bureau of Planning and Sustainability is context. They manage the climate action plan. They also are one of the few bureaus that are coordinating bureaus. So there's a lot of bureaus in the city that are kind of more siloed bureaus. So they're really focused, let's say, on delivering water infrastructure. Whereas you have some of these coordinating bureaus that we tend to work with really well because they work cross silos. And so we essentially investigated this project, the ETR project, with these criteria, and it changed everything. So the first part is vision. We immediately started questioning, like, what was the stuff we were going to have to do to get to an updated map that wouldn't that one would actually be something we could use because it had enough good data and it was put together well enough, but also that had enough voices in it that actually made the thing useful. So for example, if you're building an ETR and you're not deeply engaging, let's say, the Water Bureau to understand where the Water Bureau is going to want to fix their 7 first mains that they know will break. If you're not doing that very well, your ETR list isn't very good. So immediately we're like, okay, this is not enough people. And we kind of started to blow the project up. And we started to land around something that was more along the lines of, what is a resilient infrastructure strategy for the city in the context of a big earthquake? We even went a step further than that. And this is like semi-intentional. I'm doing this at the time. Some of this is me reflecting on this right now of what we did. The other thing we did, though, is when we thought about motivation, there was a bunch of people that care about earthquakes within the city. It is a fairly narrow, esoteric topic because it's a thing that happens, whatever, every 250 years. People are like, yeah, whatever, I'll be dead. Or something. So there's a variety of different responses to earthquakes. But climate's a bit different. And it's a bit, it is a bit more immediate, although it also is existential and large and maybe long-term. But so we decided that when we were gonna explore resilient infrastructure, the 2 things we were going to start exploring was actually climate forcing scenarios, and we were also going to look at earthquake. For that idea of building this big enough vision that's going to intentionally be kind of complex. It also helped us with motivation because the city of Portland really cared about climate at the time. That was their big thing. So how do we get their attention? We put climate front and center. It also helped us get our core team member, the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, all the way on board. That first meeting when we weren't really talking about climate, they were partially on board. Once we brought climate in, they're like, I'm all in. Okay, so deep motivation. Capacity. From that first meeting, we're like, oh my goodness, because we have this bigger vision, we have to do all these other things. And so we immediately started looking for grants. We immediately started to be like, we need more people, more resources. That was one of the first things. And then the fourth piece is that we immediately started thinking about not a positional team. So not just like, who are the right people from the right bureaus that need to get together to form a committee to do the thing. But instead, how do we form a team of people that can build trusting, hardworking relationships and who can really show up and do really, really hard work? Because it's going to take a lot of time. So we thought about the team a little differently. And I'm going to go through now the 3 phases. I hope this isn't, I've never kind of broken down this project, but I'm going to kind of belabor how we did this throughout the project because I think it makes a really important point of the level of intention that you can bring to a project like this and get to fundamentally different outcomes. But it is impossible. It is impossible to do without a level of intention. So on the right here, throughout the presentation, I'll start to pepper in some of the content areas. So this is looking at liquefaction zones within the city of Portland. What's fascinating when you start to overlay our infrastructure, and I'll talk with you about this. Guess where we put all of our infrastructure within our city? Like our sewer, our water, a lot of transportation routes. They're all in these like Liquefaction zones, and liquefaction means big earthquake, shaking, all the infrastructure goes into the water. Terrible places to be during an earthquake. You want to be here. We're here. In this first phase, so we built this great core team. That team I was talking about, we built like 7 people, highly motivated, people that had time, people that knew each other a little bit too. These were not the positional people. These were the people that were like, they cared about that vision. They really wanted to make it go. We also realized there's this broader network. So part of achieving a resilient infrastructure strategy, yes, let's develop a report. Let's go through what we'll eventually go through is some scenarios that will develop some data to create a report. But if we get to the report at the other end and we don't actually have new capacity, so new ways of understanding kind of what this map looks like, new ways of working across the city, like a heightened sense of interest in the topic. If we hadn't built that capacity up, it was kind of a loss. Like we would have this narrow report that may not have momentum to do what we want to do, which is to influence policy decisions and investments. So up front, we actually talked with the main people who cared about earthquakes and climate and infrastructure. And we didn't just interview them to extract data. We interviewed them to engage them, to very specifically asking questions. If we do this thing, how can we do it in a way that really motivates you? And it ended up totally changing what we did. And we had to stand by that. We did the interviews in a way that changed what we did. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But one of the things is we almost had, I think, 15 different people that played high stakes roles in the scenarios that we actually ran, the 2-day event that we would eventually run. In this first phase, we got new money. So I got money for internships, for additional grants. We also did all this work to build new maps that had never been built before. So to bring in data sets where we're overlaying liquefaction with water infrastructure, ETRs, sewer infrastructure. That's not this map, sorry. But we have these maps, and we did this in our data visualization studio, which is similar to your studio here, and we had people interact with that data. But it was this kind of new maps, disruptive kind of approach. And then, whoops. And then the other thing we did in this phase is we actually developed scenarios for what would happen. So instead of being like, here's the data, let's kind of think about the data and have some conversations about connections or whatever, we actually ran through a 9.0 magnitude earthquake has hit. This is what's happening. And then so we're developing these kind of like disruptive scenarios to get people thinking differently. I think a lot about like the work I did with Lauren around gamification, like how do you get people in different mindsets? Okay, so then for this phase, then as I mentioned, we had this focus on our team was meeting regularly. We were doing activities that were not just focused on the project, but also we were building relationships together. I also mentioned how we were building this engaged network around the project. So these people that weren't just like saying, hey, this is what you should do, but hey, this is what you should do, and then taking a step into the middle with us. And we were also growing capacity. So these are 3 of the factors. If you looked at that earlier list that I had, these disruptive factors for how we build partnerships and teams differently. Okay, so then phase 2, like what we landed on was doing a 2-day exercise with about 52 people in a room like this, where we laid out these scenarios. So this one is the climate scenario, which not ironically, I'm not sure the right word, but something similar happened recently in Southern Oregon, where you have high snowpack and then you have a warm atmospheric river. Which you're thinking like some of the data can suggest that with a warming climate, you're going to see more of these types of events. And what that will do is it will create flash flood scenarios. And what you're going to start to see is these huge impacts that are happening to our city. So you're going to see massive landslides. And so we have a landslide layer. And you're also going to see huge impacts to our water supply. Some interesting things that we kind of faced here is that when you see really high Columbia River raising up, it's likely in this scenario to flood 2 of our well fields, where we're treating sewage. So you're going to have these like interconnected water sewage issues. But we laid out these series of scenarios. So we did one on climate, and then we had all these small groups that came together and essentially talked about the interconnections between the infrastructure and the scenario, and answered prompts about how they would deal with this situation, with the whole idea of us kind of pushing at how would we proactively think about this issue so that we could actually do some proactive planning. And here's what we were doing very intentionally with the team and partnership development. So once again, deep participation. So we had these 15 people that were playing a real significant role in the scenarios, in the development of the maps. And then we were also, no one was sitting back. This is rotating small group conversations where everyone was talking and engaging. It was really meant to like get everyone's voice and to get their engagement. Once again, we have these creative and disruptive scenarios. We also, when we built the small groups, the people that were working together, we intentionally mixed up the different bureaus. So instead of all the water people being over here and all the parks people being over here, we mixed it all up because one of the outcomes was to get these people to know each other differently and also to be able to understand different cultures and different ways in managing different types of infrastructure. We also did a pre-post survey asking questions specifically like, rate your ability to identify areas for joint bureau collaboration to increase city asset resilience and recovery. So we're asking questions at the front end, like, how well can you do this now? And then we did post surveys. And I'll tell you in a little bit how it went, and post surveys of saying like, how well did this exercise build your capacity to do integrated planning? Which is, if you remember what I said before, we don't want to just get to a report that says, here's your resilient infrastructure strategy. We want to get a report with an army of people behind it that have new capacities to advance that report. Okay, the last phase though, and this is really important. So we did the event. Oh, wait, let's see. Sorry, last piece here. This is important. Informal networking after. So at the end of each day, we had 45 minutes where we were able to get food and drinks. Okay, food and drinks and have no agenda and just literally have people connect and talk and build connections amongst themselves. It was, you okay? Okay. And we did that both days and we had like a 95% attendance rate, plus people came that weren't even at the thing. So I remember like one of the commissioners actually came to the thing, and some of the stuff that happened in that space was the beginning of the activation of what comes next. So that is really critical. If we didn't create that space, we end in this kind of like dull, non-human way. Humans want to break bread, they want to connect. Okay, so in the last phase, the milestones that occurred here is we did generate a report. We thought about the marketing of this pretty interestingly. Instead of just like going to the city council or something, we kind of disseminated it across 7 different bureaus, and everyone had different roles in doing that. We also had a moment where we kind of debriefed as this core team. So at the very end, I remember our core team went out to dinner together and kind of spent a couple hours together. And it was this really interesting moment to build relationships. But also what happened is that we created space for the next vision to kind of emerge, for this project not to be the end, but for us to start thinking about what might come next already. And so we both thought about that, and then we started building this capacity to carry on to the next phase. And there's already, as part of this project, there was already these projects that had been lifted up that would say, like, this is how we start to activate this strategy. One of my favorites was that in the earthquake scenario, one of the things that happens is our water backbone breaks down. So Bull Run, so we have some of the freshest water in Portland and most reliable, significant source. Bull Run up near Mount Hood funnels all the way down to Portland, but it's kind of the system for doing that is not resilient, at least at this moment. They're working on a project right now. And under an earthquake scenario, you're looking at like 1 to 3 months before you get water back from that backbone. And that's like if things are going well. And so the Water Bureau had always been thinking about the earthquake scenario and how quickly can they get their backbone up, right? And part of this project, what they figured out is that one of the assets we mapped was something in parks. And the fact that parks has 32 different wells that have been drilled in a distributed manner across the city. And if you retrofitted those wells, you could have enough water for your city. So what if you, instead of, you could proactively retrofit those wells, totally changes your timeline and the ability to get water to people and keep people in the city. So I thought it was a cool project. It happened. That project's going on. But also, we had money because we had thought ahead of time that we wanted to do something after this. So we had money to fund that right away. So we got an intern and a collaborative team started on that. And so as we were ending this project, the next thing was already forming. The other thing that happened is that core team morphed, and we brought in, so that engagement work we did with that broader community of 52, there's another 5 people that joined in, and a group formed that was essentially the implementation team for the report. Okay, so that's the story of this one project. and kind of my attempt to make this connection between like, how did we try and move away from just that kind of taking it in a very incremental way? And you can see how just by changing that vision and paying attention to a few new things, the project got a lot bigger, it got a lot more interesting. And by the end, we got a lot closer at making progress towards a really hard problem. Like we didn't solve a resilient Portland. Portland is still not 100% resilient, but we advanced something that I would say made durable and significant progress. And that group has continued to evolve and do more work related to resilience. Like that work continues today, which is, in my opinion, a really telltale sign of this. Okay, so all that is happening. Let me take this. This is the network that Lauren was mentioning, which, does anyone know what GCSO is? It was created by ASU. Well, what is GCSO then? What's the name?
What, global consortium?
Oh, sorry. Oh, I was going to do a slide. Oh, God, you weren't supposed to see that. So you're supposed to just close your eyes, but would you have been able to name it? Yes, okay. You knew it anyways.
It's an amazing network of people and organizations all over the country.
Yeah, so it's this great network, like really focused. I think it was a network of about 100 different universities. I think Lauren, we knew each other maybe before this. I can't remember. But we put a proposal in. Lauren and I were both working on city university partnerships, and then there's this whole network of other city university partners across the globe that were doing that too from different angles. And so we put a proposal in to kind of fuse that network together. So all that work that I was describing before, that intellectual capital to think about how we build teams differently in that resilience project, kind of got imported into this amazing network of people that were learning together, testing, and also failing, and also increasingly connecting this learning into the literature and into kind of practices. So is this really great? This is also, I also like to mention, we were doing remote teams before it was cool. So we started this in 2016 and we managed this whole network through Skype and all this stuff. And then like when COVID hit, we got kind of like PTSD. It's like, but even then we knew, this is also a small aside, the relationships that really drove this, we actually gathered in person and maintained the network virtually, but the in-person relationships that we formed were super critical to our success. So all those lessons before funneled into this like amazing project. And then I personally started doing projects differently. Everything I was doing was a bit different than I was trying to push against the incremental way. But what it did, one of the first things it did is it said, hey, what type of problems are we really trying to face? And maybe people have seen this slide before from FSG, that, you know, the simple problem, you know, give me a recipe and some ingredients, I'll make a cake. The complicated is like, let's do some advanced algebra and I'll take your rocket to the moon. And then the complex problems are the non-linear feedback, the raising the child. My two children, I both give them one lollipop. One kid hits me with it, the other one eats it, right? You know, it's like, it doesn't make sense. These are the types of problems that I was facing and that increasingly our society faces. These are the hard ones that we don't know how to solve, really. And they're really tricky. And the reason I put this up is because part of that global network was clarifying that our city university partnerships were trying to go after complex problems. That's why we needed partnerships. We didn't need partnerships to bake a cake. We needed partnerships to do something really hard that none of us could do individually. So that was a really interesting part of the puzzle. The other part was then to put this in the context of like, okay, if we're going after complex solutions, what type of change do we need? Do we need incremental change? No. We need change that somehow responds to the structural and historic limitations and overcomes them, and it can overcome them across time. I always like this definition of transformation, but it's these like fundamental shifts in the system that are durable. That's what we want with transformation. And so we're going after, we're building teams and partnerships that are going after complex problems that need transformation. That really came together into what we're calling kind of transformative partnerships. And so that was kind of the literature, and that, I mean, Lauren and I worked on really closely with this network, which was to really envision, like, if you're trying to build these types of teams and partnerships, like, what are the structures and what are the approaches that allow you to do that? And my earlier story kind of harkens back to some of the early experiments, and then we kind of started to land into this world that now has really encompassed most of my life. Is really thinking about how do we build disruptive partnerships and teams. I will mention that if you read the paper that we wrote on this, which will, yes, be coming up here, that Lauren is the lead author on, it really focuses on the city-university partnerships, and it focuses on that unit, city-university partnerships, to advance sustainability outcomes. And at least in my practice, I've also now started to apply that to community university partnerships and also to apply it to transformative teams, the way we develop teams. Because these partnerships that we're trying to build, inter-organizational partnerships, are only as good as the teams that underpin them. So if you have incremental teams, you can't make transformational partnerships. So what we landed on was this model for how we think differently about partnerships. I will give a preface to this too, is like when I present on this sometimes, it feels like an overwhelming amount of disruption sometimes, or a long list of new things to do that we're not doing right now in our practice. And it's not meant to be taken that way. Instead, it's meant to like lay out kind of a visionary idea for where partnerships could go. And then very much I focus on how do we empower people to start taking the imperfect and incremental steps forward towards them, but to take some sort of steps. So that's the paper down there that we wrote, or that this comes from. So I'm going to go through these structures really quickly, and I'm really just going to talk about what they are, and then I will talk about how we've activated them. So one of the core elements, and you'll see some parallels, but the nicer language, better images here. All the images, by the way, are from a grad student at PSU. We actually built a game, Lauren and I, to kind of build, or we gamified how you build transformative partnerships. These are from the cards of the game. But the first part is like establish the norms and structures that support transformation. So this is an enabling factor. It seems pretty basic, but if you're stating that you're going to have a transformation, what are those things that are going to allow those critical components that are going to make that transformation sustain over time? I'll talk very specifically later on about what those are, but like a few of them are, for example, like being able to have continuous learning, because the transformation is complex and evolving. But you need to be able to establish these norms within your teams. This one's one that people don't think about a ton, but is so critical, is when we're starting new partnerships or new teams, how are we actually addressing past conflict and ensuring that we're building a foundation of trust and respect? Quite often we'll kind of go willy-nilly into some of these new collaborations without fully excavating what's been there before. I have a great example of like starting a new collaboration with the city of Portland, and we were working on water, and they were really not wanting to work with me, even though I had a good idea and I had some money, and I was like, what's going on? And I learned, but it took some some excavation. I learned that they had this really bad experience with a faculty who was publishing data without getting their permission. Like that was an experience they had before. And if I kept going on this without fully excavating that, then the partnership will eventually be constrained, right? They'll only want to go so far with me. So if the idea is to keep going with these partners and keep evolving this work, we have to do that early work. So expanding the partnership to encompass transformational goals that can inform discrete projects. So this is also, and we wrote a paper about this too that we'll describe a little bit later, but it's moving away from this idea of just start and figure it out, but actually trying to have enough of a sense for the change you're trying to seek so that you're activating under that change. Because if you are able to frame out that transformation, then you're able to hone it through the projects, as opposed to sometimes the projects can become distractions. I mentioned this multiple times, but investing in relationships that underpin the project or the partnership, this is absolutely critical, because this is how we build trust. This is how we build chemistry. This is how we build human connection. These are all constraining factors for doing really hard things together. And guess what? We don't do this very often in normal teams and partnerships. We say, hey, here's the work on the table. Let's do the work together. But maybe we don't take enough time to understand the perspective or the lived experience that a person's bringing into that work, or some of their constraints, their personal constraints, or the type of work they want to do. And then finally, designing actions that are deeply motivating. In my practice, and we learn this in the work a lot too, quite often, especially in the city-university partnership case, but this translates more broadly, we kind of lift up these ideas that sound really good, and we can get them to be a little contagious for those around us for a moment. But we've never asked the question of, do you really want to do this with me? Like, is this something that's helping check a box that's already on your list, or is this just a new list? And if we keep just building new lists, then we don't get much momentum on the things we really care about. But that's a lot of the first phase of my career was essentially that. It was just building these new lists. And I was just moving a bunch of pegs like that. And I wanted to change the dynamic to moving a bunch of pegs up. Okay, so this is where I find this is the last piece, but this is the part that I find the most interesting, because this is where like these concepts about how we build effective and transformative teams, this is how they come to life. These are the tangible things. These are the disruptions that we can put into play in our daily practice that change the course of things. If we stick with the principles and we don't get to this point, then it's kind of sad. So I'm glad I had long enough to get here. And on the left, I'll describe the enabling factors, and then I'll give 2 examples for each one. So fund partnership activities. This is like, so when we're talking about some of the supporting structures and norms, quite often the way we build projects is we get a project funded, right? And so we're doing these different projects, and there tends to be limited capacity for thinking across projects, or for proactively working on projects, or for doing activities that can't be funded like very easily within a project. And so if we're going to establish norms around transformation, we actually have to get the middle funded. We did this recently. It took a long time, but in the city of Portland, we advocated for PSU as part of this big project to be a central convener within this large decarbonization project. And we advocated to get money to be at the center, to help write grants, to convene people, to communicate. And we eventually got it. We got a 5-year grant just recently to do that work at the middle. And it's transformative, because guess what? If we're kind of supported to do that work at the middle, we can now go empower this network. And then we can also keep momentum towards a big, hard challenge. If it's funded by the project kind of dies. You try and connect it to another thing. It's a much harder and more awkward thing to accomplish. So fund the middle. Also, I should say all these things are very hard to do, but I think are worthwhile. This is another paper, Liliana Kaufman, who's a faculty here as lead author, but implement formative evaluation. This is a formative evaluation tool for assessing the partnership in real time, city-university partnership in real time. So formative evaluation being a continuous evaluation tool that's used for adaptive management of a partnership or a project. We had all these great, so when you're doing something complex, you're going to learn something in the middle of that project that's really important for doing better work. Unless you capture that learning and have a mechanism for taking that learning and changing strategy, guess what? The learning goes away or goes into an end-of-year report. That's pretty sad, right? So if you can implement formative evaluation, you're going to be able to capture those moments. You're going to create better cycles in the future. So now addressing history of conflict, and this is a really hard one. I'm bad at this, real bad. But one of the things we did is pre-project discussion. So even before we were really getting into something like I know exactly what I wanted to do, being able to talk through with potential collaborators and create space for things to emerge that are important for the design of the project. This is like pre-work. This is powerful work that will allow you to see important pieces of conflict or context, and maybe get you some pieces of conflict. The best way to get the conflict is to be able to have conversations where there's trust already between the two people talking. So at the foundation of most partnerships I build is you're trying to build trust because you're trying to build a capacity for people to tell you what's really going on. The second part is that as you understand those policies or those points of conflict, then developing those policies to address them proactively. So the example, I mean, this seems basic, but like the data example I gave, right? Okay, so when we're doing collaborations, you have new data that you're getting from your partner, it needs to go through this group before it goes out. And we've established these clear policies that are put into place that are hopefully proactively dealing with some of these issues we've seen. And the whole idea being that we're maintaining and growing our ability to trust and work together. So expanding the partnership to encompass transformational goals that can inform discrete projects. So the big thing here is this is a paper we wrote looking at how, as we connect partnerships, our project activities to partnerships, we grow transformative capacity over time. It's essentially saying that, like, as we need to look at how the partnership and the project are interacting. If the project is, eroding the partnership over time, you're going to have it go down like that. But if we can create a virtuous cycle between those two, the project activities and the partnership, so the things we're doing to build relationships and trust, then over time, we can have more transformation in the world. Part of this cycle here too is also trying to understand at the beginning, and we did this with the project I presented at the beginning, having a sense for where things could go beyond the first phase, so that you're already starting to kind of lay out that broader pathway. Because if the goal is to work on transformation, then the goal is not just to finish the project, it's to get the next project. So along this too, activating projects that help us better understand root cause issues associated with transformation. So like a big thing that like we really have faced is, or that I've really focused on is like, and this goes back to the kind of the history of, or trying to find history of collaboration and conflicts, but is really trying to go understand what is limiting our ability to transform in a certain space. I'll use the same example of what's it called? The Clean Energy Project. When we were trying to put ourselves in the middle of that project and be a core convener, we didn't really know some of the root causes that were limiting that factor. And one thing we ended up finding out was that there was this distrust of what the city actually thought the role the university could play. So we really had to like get down to that root cause that was limiting our ability to build some of these transformational structures. This number 4 is like where I spend a lot of my time is investing in relationships. I'm a certified coach as well as consultant. And one of the disruptive things I like to do when we're building teams, this is has anyone heard of Clifton Strengths before?
What is it?
Clifton Strengths, like it's a personality assessment thing.
Is it by Gallup?
Yeah. And what I've done with teams early and often is really understanding the different, like doing the strengths assessment, and then early in the project, understanding the different ways people want to work. Like where do they normally get conflict? Where do they get joy, excitement, all that stuff, asking that up front. And by doing that, we're better understanding how people want to show up and how people want to do work. Quite often that goes against the normal way, which is let's all sit in a room and like you have this expertise, you have this expertise. This allows us to connect at a much deeper level. And then it becomes a tool also for how we proactively think about partnerships across the team and where there could be conflicts. I always like Lauren and I both have activator pretty high. And I always like to give the example that like, if we're setting a meeting, I'm like, I'm gonna set the meeting, and Lauren's like already set the invite, and then I set the invite on top of it. And that's that activator being like, whoa, like we both want to get going. And so, but if we acknowledge that, like, then I'm like, okay, who's setting the meeting? And like I'm proactively understanding where that space or where that that's not really like where that come from. And this is like a lot of my work right now is in this space. It's just really understanding how people want to show up differently and making sure that's front and center in everything we're doing. And then building informal spaces to connect. I mentioned this multiple times in the earlier project, but like getting out of conference rooms and, you know, on walks or in spaces that change the way we show up in relationships. It really matters for especially having conversations that maybe are a bit more personal or that require a different type of mental space. All right. So actions that are deeply motivating. This is one of my favorite examples from this 2025 or 2015 climate action plan from the city of Portland. I remember going to them early. I was like, I want to do something with you all. I got all these ideas, these faculty that want to do these things. And they looked at me and they're like, we already have way too much. And they're like, you should look here where we have 185 things that we're doing. And we flipped this and we built this whole partnership that was just around us activating the action items that are already on the list. So we became the momentum builder behind already identified actions. Deeply motivating. For each one of these projects we launched, we had someone that was already responsible for it. Therefore, they're already going to care with us, which is a huge thing. And the last one here is understanding timing and constraints for the project. So once again, if you're early on, if you're understanding different ways people are working, but you're also understanding this life cycle of work for different people. Some people, you know, have to be home with, you know, to meet their kids at certain times, vacations, all these things that seem almost like minutia that are not important are really critical for figuring out how to do projects together. And so asking those questions, those very basic questions early on, give us the conditions to not get into projects where people are burnt out or feel like they can't show up because they have these other things that have been unsaid. Okay, so all of that stuff has been like kind of my life's work. Like that's the stuff that I bring into projects, and a lot of those examples are things that I've mostly done with people. I use the term we a lot because it's never me. It's this great constellation of people I've gotten to work with. And I reached a point last year where I was like, this stuff is like drawing my heart. Like I want to spend more and more of my time building teams and building partnerships. And I was running an institute, so like I was spending a lot of my time writing grants and writing reports. And I had a tremendous amount of freedom compared to a lot of people, but I'm like, I want to make this front and center. And so that's really what I've done with this consulting firm, is like put this work at the middle, and really testing out some fundamental questions of, one, can I get paid for that? Question mark. Two, and what's the impact also of someone, an individual, a consultant in this case, who's working with teams and all that stuff I was talking about, is someone who's caring about that as their central job. That's what I've positioned myself to do. And so I've only been doing this for maybe 5 months, but I'll say early signs say that I can get paid, and that it's incredibly joyful work and impactful work. So the last piece here is, this is what I'm doing right now. These are kind of the activities. So like the main functions are, I'm trying to build really good strategy for people. So as people are working on strategy, and this includes like bringing in things like formative evaluation, like as we're working on projects, how are we bringing learning in, and how's that changing our vision? How's that improving our vision? And I'm also, just to be clear, I'm working with people that are dealing with issues internally, like building a new school, or externally also, addressing a big climate issue. I work very specifically on team development. So like proactive things I'm doing with teams to create strength ahead of conflict, create policies for how people, and norms for how people work together, but also flexing the muscles of being strong teams. Implementing adaptive management systems, I mentioned earlier too, things like formative evaluation, ongoing learning that's improving strategy. They're really nice things to have. Who does that? That's something I've been able to bring into my job. And then providing direct capacity to implement. The other thing, like as people are working on complex issues, I found like it's really helpful sometimes just to be able to raise my hand and be like, yes, I can help write that report, or yes, I can do that. And just give that capacity that helps that team who really wants to get to that finish line, get all the way there. Okay, and the last success factors I've had is most things I'm working on are these like big complex goals, checkbox for working on transformational stuff. There's a direct connection to this decision makers or the people that are controlling culture. That's also really critical. I've worked on team development stuff when I'm not at that place, and it's incredibly frustrating and kind of ineffective usually, or not as effective as it could be. And really, I'm in most of these teams, like I'm serving as a consultant, but also as an ongoing functional member of the group. So I am both helping the team and part of the team, which is something I'm really thinking about a lot, but it is really critical, I think, to building the trust and chemistry necessary to do the work. That is it. These are the citations. This is a thank you.